Sustaining Creativity podcast. I'm your host, Mari Riesberg. Over the past several years, I've combined my degrees in acting and somatic psychology to share my sustaining creativity techniques with performers. And now I've decided to share it with a bigger audience that includes you. I believe we are all creative, and this podcast is all about that. I'll be interviewing people from all backgrounds, ages, and creativity experiences to share just how creative we all are. Today, I'll be chatting with Donald Rattner, architect, author, and educator. He helps people maximize their creativity by applying research in design psychology to the built environment. Please enjoy Donald Rattner. Welcome to the Sustaining Creativity podcast. Today, I am here with Donald Rattner. He is an architect, author, and educator. Welcome to the podcast.
Hi, Mari. Thank you for having me. Pleasure to be here.
I am super excited to chat with you today about creativity. But before we dive into questions, if you wouldn't mind just letting our listeners know a little bit more about who you are and what you do.
Sure. So as you said, I am an architect, and what I try to do is to help people maximize their creativity by showing them how to use research in design psychology to shape their physical surroundings. And as you mentioned also, I am an author. I put together everything I know about this subject in a book called My Creative Space: How to Design Your Home to Stimulate Ideas and Spark Innovation. And there's a little sort of trailer there, 48 science-based techniques. I know it's a mouthful, but I am very proud to say it's won about a half dozen awards so far and has been an Amazon #1 new release and bestseller. So it's getting some good reception, I'm happy to say. Besides writing, as you also mentioned, I do teach, I give talks, and last I have wonderful conversations with talented podcast hosts such as yourself. And finally, I am a graduate of Columbia, and I got my master's in architecture from Princeton.
Nice. My goodness. I'm so intrigued by this book, and so I want to hear so much more about it. It sounds so fascinating how creativity and design really go together and support innovation by creating space or setting up your space to incite or spark innovation in your home. That just sounds, how did you come up with this? Or like, where did this spark from for you?
Yeah, where's that light bulb moment? I guess if I had to sort of search back in time, and sometimes you don't realize when things happen until much later in time. It all started with a project that I got as an architect, which required me to utilize a different form of construction than I was typically used to. So what I was typically used to was custom design, basically, where I could literally sit down with a pad and pencil, draw anything I want and get it built, provided it met budget and all those other kind of technical needs and the client's need, all that kind of stuff. But it was really a blank piece of paper. But then along came a project where I was required to use what's called modular construction. I don't know if you've heard this term before, but this is where they actually build parts of a building in a factory, right? Rather than on the property. Okay. And you may have seen them, these big trucks with these kind of long, they look like, frankly, mobile homes on the backs of the trucks. That is, these are big boxes which are constructed in the factory. They've got the walls, the floors, the ceilings. They've got plumbing, electrical in their walls. They're mostly finished. They take them to the site and they put these boxes together, finish them off, with the outside finishes or maybe some inside, and voila, you have a building. So it was like going from that sort of blank pad and crayon, so to speak, to, say, being creative with Legos. So think of the difference between the two. Blank page, you can kind of draw whatever you can possibly imagine. There's no limits per se. Whereas Lego, someone says, here's a brick and it's got 6 nubs or 4 nubs or 2 nubs, and that's it. That's all you have to work with. Now go and be creative. And of course, we all know how creative people can be with Legos, because you can create almost anything with these just few units that are given to you as a
Yeah.
starting point. So that just got my whole brain working, like, oh, so what is this creativity thing, at least within the context of architecture? Got me thinking it's not as I had necessarily thought it to be, that is the blank page, but there's also a
Mhm.
different way to approach it. And that just got me down the rabbit hole of, starting to read about, okay, creativity, architecture, what is it? And I started to come across all of these articles, posts, research papers where scientists had begun to connect elements in our physical surroundings. Could
Hmm.
be anything from color to ceiling heights to
Mhm.
furnishings, and then correlating them with improvements in human creativity because
Mhm.
of the way our environment enters into our conscious, the way our brains have evolved over millions of years to respond to elements in our surroundings. And
Mhm.
it was like, bing, ding, ding, look at all this stuff. Now I looked around and said, nobody's like brought it all together in under one roof, so to speak, and between two covers, nor have they kind of made it accessible to the non-scientists out there in the world, which included myself, certainly. So I set
Mhm.
out on this journey venture to constitute this material in a way to make it accessible to people, to bring it a kind of real world practicality, and to put it in one place. And that's where my creative spaces came out. And that's where I've been for, I don't know, now 4 or 5 years.
Nice. I love this. I mean, this is such a component of creativity coaching, the space that people get creative in. I'm so curious when you think about creative spaces, what, how, how am I going to ask this? So, in the world of creativity, safety is a huge component to creativity. When you're designing spaces or supporting others to design creative spaces, does this idea of safety show up, and how does it?
Yeah, absolutely. So and you're absolutely right, safety and creativity do go together, psychological safety, certainly.
Yeah.
For example, in furnishings, they have
Mhm.
done studies where they have tested people in terms of how they react to furnishings, which are either predominantly, let's say, curvilinear,
Mm.
rounded, curved in overall silhouette or in some of the details, versus furniture that's very straight edge, just straight back, straight lines,
Mhm.
edges, and corners. And what they've discovered is that when people are exposed to furnishings of a more curvaceous, sensuous, sinuous, I suppose, character, they actually
Mhm.
become more creative than when they are put into contact with this very straight edge rectilinear furniture. And you kind of go, okay, what's up with that?
Yeah.
Why would that be the case? So the theory is, and by the way, when we're dealing with psychological matters, we always have to be kind of in the realm of theory, because we can't prove why humans respond to inputs the way they do with the same, logical certainty. We can prove that 2 + 2 = 4 in whole
Right.
integers, but these scientists, they're like sort of like lawyers or attorneys, right? They're
Mhm.
almost as if they were presenting a case before a judge and a jury. So they're going to mass their evidence, they're going to look to other research, and they're going to form an argument, a narrative that attempts to explain, based on their knowledge of how the human
Mhm.
mind works, what's going on here. So the theory with this is that, and here we got to go back a couple of million years, right? To when
Right.
humans, we can all dial back, when humans were evolving as a species.
Mhm.
So first of all, we were all, of course, in a pure state of nature, right? We're just running around the African savannah. There's no buildings, there are no
Mhm.
walls, there's no air conditioning, these kind of things to mediate between us and the environment. So we had to be extremely sensitive to what's going on around us if we wanted to stay alive, if we
Mhm.
wanted to survive. So, for example, in the case of the round versus the straight, the theory is that, well, generally speaking, there aren't very many straight edges and pointy things in nature, but when they do exist, they do tend to hurt us, right? You
Right.
think about
Right.
like rock outlines, these jagged lines that come to a sharp corner, or teeth,
Mhm.
obviously, animal talons, all of those things were threats to our existence. So
Mhm.
over time, our brains developed to the point where it would just kind of sense straight and pointy things and
Mm.
go into a defensive mode. And here's where the safety thing exactly comes into play, which is to say, the moment we feel unsafe, the moment we feel threatened, that there's some potential for self-harm, we move into what's called left brain thinking, right? That's
Mhm.
that analytical left brain, very reasoned, very logic, very focused, very alert, very concentrated type of of mental processing, and we become very defensive, all of which kind of runs counter to the idea of creativity, where you want to feel relaxed, you want to feel safe enough to go venture into unknown territory, things people never have done before, right? Without fear of being ridiculed or failing. So we see our brains move into a right brain configuration when we're exposed to things that are predominantly round and curvy, because, hey, they're like cuddly, right? They're things we can embrace literally and physically. And so I think the fundamental idea is that generally anything that causes stress in us is sort of a creativity killer, whereas those things that make us feel relaxed and chill and right with our environment tend to boost creativity. And the furnishings is a great example. And by the way, they've also done similar studies or research into space itself, the shaping of space. So if you're in a round space, a circular space, or a space with a lot of curvy walls versus very hard edge and everything is straight and curvy, we see that same kind of shift into right brain thinking as we did with the furnishings.
Nice. I love how the world comes together to support creativity in so many different capacities. And I think many people don't think about furnishings and how that can also support creativity in your life. So I'm super excited to have you here and chat about it. But
yeah, my pleasure.
I'm really curious, what does it mean to you to be creative?
So let me put on my wonkish academic hat for a moment here. So I think it's a key question, obviously. And I think, if we were to go out in the street and say, excuse me, sir or madam, what do you think creativity is? 9 times out of 10 people are going to say, oh, well, and are you creative? They're going to say, oh, I can't draw, or I'm no Picasso. Or so you hear that same kind of response. Yeah. So that actually is more reflective of what maybe people think creativity is, but it really isn't. Now, here's where I'm going to get kind of academic on people, but it's really a useful definition. There's something called the consensus definition of creativity. This is what I discovered, and I started to research the book, which is that creativity, here it comes, is the development of novel and useful ideas for products, services, and systems. So when I give talks, I'm usually, giving a PowerPoint thing along with it, because I like to do lots of pretty pictures along the way, keep people, awake and alert. They will see that the words novel and useful, those are bolded, right? Because they really got to stand out. So those are the key terms. By novel, of course, we mean new, original, unique, surprising, all of those synonyms for the novel, the new. By useful, yes, certainly in a pragmatic, sort of utilitarian sense, but I think more broadly, if we think about usefulness as also meaning something that has value to people. So for example, a work of art doesn't have any real, like a painting, let's say, for example, doesn't have a practical function to it yet. Obviously, we consider it to be a creative product because of the social, intellectual, emotional value it brings to us. And you will also, of course, notice in my slide that the word and is also bolded, because an idea has to be both. It's like, you can't be just one or the other, because like, let's say you make up gibberish words. Okay, that's very novel, but nobody understands what you're talking about. So, but there's no usefulness. Whereas if you do something that's useful, but someone has already done before, then technically speaking, you're not really being creative. The interesting thing about that definition also is, speaking of art, you'll notice when you kind of think about that or write it down at home, there's no reference to the arts in it, right? So here's where we see a shift. And this happened in the kind of mid 20th century, where we see a shift from what had been a traditional association between creativity and the arts, probably goes back to the Renaissance. We're now seeing it much more broad, because you could think about this in almost within the context of almost any discipline: science, marketing, publishing, finance, as well as the traditional design fields. So that's where, any kind of endeavor or task or problem you're trying to solve, for which you can develop novel and useful ideas, they are subject to creativity, to exercising your creativity.
I love that. I love bringing in all of those different arenas and how creativity shows up in all of them, and how what creativity has really changed and evolved over time. And yet so many people still hold on to maybe a more historic version of what creativity is. So I love that you are here to help me spread the
Doing a little
word.
bit every day, couple
Exactly.
of dozen folks every day, that it starts to add up after a while. Spread the word, spread the news. But yeah, I mean, these ideas that have been around for hundreds of years, they're slow to change,
Yeah.
obviously. But I think the more we can kind of spread the word, and there's an enormous industry out there in
Mhm.
creativity studies that I discovered
Yeah.
after being in architecture for many years. There are people who literally spend their days studying creativity. What does it mean? How does it
Mhm.
manifest itself, and how can we do better at it? That, of course, is a big part of it, and I'm glad to make my own little contribution.
Nice. Yeah. And it is the skill of the future,
It is indeed,
creativity.
exactly, especially there's a whole kind of discussion about how advanced industrial countries such as the US
Hmm.
can maintain the sort of quality of life that we've been able
Hmm.
to up to now, in large part because of industrial production, in a
Hmm.
post-industrial world, right? We can't
Yeah.
make things maybe to quite the same degree that we could in terms of being able to compete with lower cost environments. So what are the things that are going to keep us kind of ahead of the game, or sustaining
Hmm.
this quality of life? It is creativity and innovation. I mean, think of something like Apple, as a classic
Yeah.
example. All right, we don't make the phones in the US anymore, but the real value came from inventing them and designing
Hmm.
them and developing them. So we can still, in fact, we have to, I think, if we're going to move forward and keep this quality of life, really
Hmm.
invest in creativity. Absolutely.
Absolutely. Well, I'm so curious. And we've been talking about creativity, but I know there's kind of this piece of challenge that many people get stuck or blocked in their own creativity. And I'm curious for yourself, when have you faced creative challenges and then how did you move through them?
Mm. Oh, I face creative challenges every day when just sitting down to try to write, a couple of pages is a
Mhm.
creative challenge. And there were times certainly where, things came to a headbutting situation. Um, a good thing to do if you do hit impasses and blocks of that sort of thing is to step away from the problem
Mhm.
altogether. Go off and do something else, to engage in what's called an incubation period.
Yeah.
People actually write about this. And what's remarkable, of course, is that, a lot of creativity is happening at or just below the level of consciousness, right? When
Yeah.
we talk about subliminal,
Mhm.
liminal means threshold. So at the threshold of creativity, subliminal it's just below that, and in the back of our minds. And that's why when we're like taking a shower, for example, and we're, just soaping up and we're not thinking about anything in particular, boom, out comes this maybe solution to this problem you've been working on for 2 weeks and haven't been able to move through. Well,
Yeah.
what's happening there is sort of something interesting, which is that because showering is such a kind of reflexive, automatic, you've done it, a repetitive kind of behavior you've done a million times before, you don't have to put a lot of mental energy in
Mhm.
focused thinking, in conscious thinking. So it sort of opens up the door to back of mind, where a lot of our information, all these ideas that you've kind of tucked away, all these little bits of information and thought are lurking, and now they can kind of bubble to the surface. And that's why they reveal themselves when you're doing something else besides being creative. So what
Yeah.
I suggest to people is, if you hit a breakthrough or impasse, step away from the problem, gestate for a while, go off and do something else. The more removed it is from creative pursuits, in some ways, the better. Like people like to wash dishes, do laundry, the most mindless kind of stuff is
Yeah.
actually can move you out of that rut that you're in.
Nice. What were the mindless tasks that you ended up doing to
Oh gosh.
break through your
Oh,
own
it's
creative
everything. It's
blocks?
all the stuff, all the domestic things around the house that you would sort of expect, from cleaning the garage and, cleaning
Yeah.
your drawers, organizing stuff. I'm not a big laundry person now that I'm out of college, so I'll leave that to somebody else. But even things, even pleasurable things like cooking, for example, is a
Mhm.
creative undertaking, but it has not nothing, but it has very little to do directly with writing or designing architecture. So
Right.
even engaging in another creative activity, as long as it has all those positive aspects we talked about a moment ago. It's
Mhm.
pleasurable, it's safe, it's relaxing, it induces positive affect, as the scientists like to call it, for something
Yep.
you and I would call put you in a good mood.
Yeah.
As long as those kind of activities kind of lean in that direction, they can open that mind up in ways you would be sort of unprepared or unexpected to think that would happen.
Nice. Yeah, I love all of the pieces of the mundane activities, getting outside, going for a walk, doing something different. And it is amazing how many times people say, I had the best idea in the shower.
Exactly, exactly. Now you mentioned just now though, taking a walk. That's one I write. That's one of my 48 techniques, which
Oh,
is has a long history of being a real
yeah.
creativity booster. And one of which is that and you might certainly know about this, is that the connection between movement and
Hmm.
creativity is very strong.
Yeah.
And that could be because the blood is flowing to the brain and all your body is into the activity. But walking is a classic. I mean, so many great breakthrough ideas have happened when people were walking, like Darwin talks about how his idea of evolution kind of
Yeah.
pops out while he's on a walk, which he did every single day, and other people as well. It is a great activity for inducing creativity, to be sure.
Absolutely. Well, I'm going to take a sharp left turn and ask you what your earliest memory of being creative is or was.
Wow. Okay, so we're not dialing back quite several million years, let's say, but a few. So yeah, I have this weird snapshot in my head. I'm sitting on the floor of an upstairs bedroom in the home that I grew up in. I must have been, I don't know, 5, and it's pitch black outside, but I'm in my pajamas. So I'm thinking must be like 5 in the morning. And in the room with me is a young friend I had at the time. He must have been my same age, and we're playing with blocks, blocks. And these blocks I sort of remember them because they were sort of shoebox sized, roughly. They were made
Mm.
out of cardboard. I mean, this is
Hmm.
some time ago, folks. um, I think on the outside they were they were printed with paper that make them look like bricks or
Hmm.
parts of a brick wall. And we're stacking and we're doing all that kind of stuff. And the parents come up and like, "What are you doing up at this hour?" kind of a thing. And we're just happy as a clam playing away. So I think that is my earliest memory, but it's just wonderful to think about because blocks obviously are a big part of childhood, and
Yeah.
this is what we like about blocks is that they're totally open-ended, right? So
Hmm.
creativity is about an open-ended process because there's always more than one way to do something. It's the search for multiple solutions to a problem, and the idea of blocks is that you can make anything you want. Well, it's those Legos again, same
Yeah.
idea of combining things in infinitely different ways to create something new.
I love it. And I had those blocks as well.
My blocks? Did I hand them down? No,
Not
some
those.
blocks like that.
Yes.
Cool,
Blocks exactly like that with
cool.
the printed
Oh,
looking
really?
like bricks on
Oh,
the
wow.
outside. Oh, yes.
Wonderful.
So
Excellent.
they've
Classics.
survived
They survive.
creativity.
Starts with a
Well,
cardboard box. Yeah.
yeah. I mean, that isn't that kind of the beauty of getting a present, getting the box it comes in and
Yeah.
turning the
Right.
box into something else.
Exactly. Adaptive reuse. But of course, the classic metaphor is thinking outside the box, right?
Right.
Here's a fun tidbit. They actually did an experiment where they put their subjects inside a 5 foot by 5 foot cardboard box that they built.
Hmm.
And this is how research is, for folks listening, this is how research is often done. They will put people in some kind of environment, obviously, and then they will give them what are called creativity assessment tests.
Hmm.
And I don't know if you have kids or were a kid yourself once, you might have taken, they were often used to evaluate gifted and talented kids, these kind of assessment tests. In any case, they put people in this box, they gave them these creativity assessment tests, and then you're always talking about multiples of people, 20, 30, 50. You want to get enough to try to
Hmm.
find that mean. You don't test 1 or 2 people because that could be idiosyncratic. And then they'd have a second group. So in this case, they had the first group inside the box. They had the second group sitting outside the box and doing exactly the same tests, right? Fresh group. And what did they find? They find that the people who sat outside the box outperform those who sat inside the box. So this is a great case of what's called embodied cognition, right? Here's where the body comes
Hmm.
in, where your body being inside that box, you felt closed in, hemmed in. What happens when we feel that way? We become closed-minded, more focused, more alert, more
Hmm.
left brain. But the moment our body is literally outside the box, suddenly it opens up. Now our minds expand as to the possibilities it will consider. So it's a fascinating example of boxes and their
Yeah.
effect on creativity. And of course, that applies to to our physical space. The more open
Mm-hmm.
you can create a space in which you do your creative pursuits. That doesn't mean big. It just
Yeah.
means that there has to be some sense of release. So if you have a window, obviously, that is a great way to expand the boundaries of that physical space.
Mm-hmm.
If you have high ceilings, they've actually done studies on ceiling heights. That also can positively impact on your creativity. The shape of furnishings we just talked about.
Yeah.
How you sit within the space can affect your thinking. All of these things. Remember, humans are extremely attuned to their environment.
Mm-hmm.
It impacts on their minds. All of these things can change or boost your creative performance if you know what to look for, if you know how to manipulate these bits of data and research to positive ends.
Yeah, I mean, it's so fascinating how all of these connect. And what you were just talking about before, combating creative challenges, getting up and doing something else. So changing your environment versus, being inside the box, outside the box physically. It makes a lot of sense. And it's a great reminder to get up and physically change your location if you are stuck in a problem or a creative endeavor.
Yeah, now it does work in both directions. Absolutely, when you kind of hit those ruts, but also if you can establish a creative workspace in your
Mm,
home or wherever it is that you come to again and again and again.
yeah.
Now what happens is, of course, like Pavlov's dogs going on here, right? Remember, so Pavlov, what did he rang a bell every time he fed his
Then,
dogs?
yep.
Ring the bell, they feed. They ring the bell, they feed. So their brain becomes what's called classically conditioned. So where
Hmm.
the point where all he had to do was ring a bell and they'd start salivating because they
Right.
associated that input with the act of eating. Well, same thing with space. If you do certain things in the same space again and again, the moment you enter into that space, your mind will shift into a creative mindset because it's been
Hmm.
conditioned to associate the one with the other.
Right. And you've myelinated your neural network pathways for that
Exactly. Yeah.
experience. I love it.
Yeah.
It's awesome. Well, what are some everyday issues that you face that you have had to use creativity to solve?
Well, certainly, every day that I'm working, I've got to string together a bunch of words that are coherent and that are
Sure.
worth reading. Um, but even on it, what we all do, right? We all get dressed. Well, let's say we mostly get dressed in the
Yeah.
morning. What are we doing? We are pulling things out of our drawers and closets. We're combining things, and we're doing so in a way that we hope has some kind of aesthetic value. That they go, mix your plaids and your stripes. You add textures, colors. You're being creative just by putting those things together. And that's a
Yeah.
classic example of creativity because a lot of people argue that creativity is really about combining things that already exist into new things. So by
Mm-hmm.
creating new outfits, by pulling in different disparate elements, you are in a sense creating something new. Cooking is another one where you're combining ingredients, sometimes for recipe, but you certainly
Mm-hmm.
have to put in your own sort of personal touch on it. But a lot of times, it's like you open the fridge and okay, what am I going to do for lunch? It's not the same old, same old. Let's try some interesting combinations of tastes to
Mm-hmm.
create something that's hopefully tasty and so forth. So, as I say, combinatorial creativity is at the crux of a lot of what I wrote about in the book. Now,
Mm-hmm.
again, you can decide, what, I only have a certain amount of creative bandwidth, and it's the same for everybody. We can
Mm-hmm.
only, be so creative in the course of the day or month or year. I want to like focus my energies on certain things. So when it comes to clothes, you could be like Steve Jobs, right?
Mm-hmm.
You could wear a black turtleneck and jeans every single darn day so that you don't have to invest any mental energy in what am I wearing today versus all those other things that Steve was doing in his life.
Right.
iPhones, iPads, Macs, and all that other good stuff. So, you can actually use it in a kind of negative way for a more positive effect. But combining things is really key to creativity. And we
Mm-hmm.
do it, as I say, every single day.
Yeah. Are you in the world of clothing creativity or cooking creativity? What are those things that really jazz you up?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not a fashionista per se, but I do pay very close attention to the things are combining.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm still like trying to figure it out. So how do you buy enough shirts and pants and things that they like can go together
Yeah.
without sort of limiting yourself to one or two things because some colors just don't go. It is a for me at least. It's a bit of a puzzle that I'm still working on. Cooking, yeah, I do my thing, but thankfully there are other people in my family who are much more adept at it than myself. But I mean, cooking in a lot of ways is a consummate creative act. I mean, when you think
Yeah.
about it in so many different ways, it encapsulates a lot of things about creativity. For example, I mean, we talked about combinatorial, but also the fact that you could have like happy accidents. So many creative
Right.
things have come about by like pure fortune and circumstance, and creativity is like, whoops, I dropped something into the batter here, but you know what? That tastes pretty good.
Yeah.
It's also a very fun activity. It's a pleasurable activity
Hmm.
much of the time. And that is also something that, of course, that keeps us wanting to be creative, because there's a feedback loop. We get pleasure from it because I think nature has programmed us again through
Yeah.
evolution, because, like being alive was the number one problem to be solved for our ancestors. And so it's wired into us. And by being a pleasurable activity, we want to do it some more. I mean, that's how nature keeps us propagating and doing all those other things, because it gives us pleasure.
Exactly.
So, it's just very life affirming in a lot of
Mm.
ways, for its own sake.
Nice. I love it. I love all these pieces, and what a great I, way to look at combinations and creativity and how they arise and create new things by combining two old things or things
Exactly.
that you come
Exactly.
up with. Yeah.
Exactly
Well,
right.
how would you encourage others to find creativity in their own lives if they don't think they are creative?
Well, first of all, as you know, as I'm sure you have heard people say, everybody has the capability of being creative. I just said we are all wired to
Yes.
be that way. Does it take some effort? Does it take skill? Does it take practice? Absolutely. But if you don't think of creativity as just it's all or nothing, meaning you're either
Mhm.
Picasso or Einstein or you're just a regular person, there's a lot of spectrum in between. And they've
Mhm.
even talked about the different levels, quote unquote, of creativity, from what's called mini C, right? Mini C is like, yeah, putting your clothes together in the morning. It's just something
Yeah.
personal. It's not life shatter, earth shattering, up to, professional creativity,
Mhm.
architects, designers, performers, and so forth, to genius. But there's a
Yeah.
lot of in between there that you can certainly engage in, and pretty much anyone
Mhm.
can. And the other thing I would say is, creativity is a lot about finding questions or
Mhm.
problems to sort of solve. And so
Mhm.
I would say, first of all, question everything. Don't take anything for a given. Just because
Yeah.
we've done something a certain way for decades or centuries doesn't mean we have to keep doing them that way.
Mhm.
Um, there's a great story about Einstein. Somebody, asked him, how do you work? Well, basically, he would spend, if he said, if I had an hour to solve a problem, I would spend 55 minutes figuring out what the problem is and 5 minutes actually solving it.
Right.
More near in time, there was an experiment done at the Art Institute of Chicago where they had these art students all doing still lifes in a studio. And
Mhm.
what they found was that the ones who spent the most time, like playing with the composition of the pieces and getting the kind of perspective right, or the appearance of the things that the still life that they were trying to paint, actually spent the least amount of time painting it, but did the best work, versus
Mm.
those that just kind of jumped into it. So think about questioning everything and then framing a question or a problem to solve, like how might I fill in the blank, do something
Mhm.
differently, more creatively, and so forth. And once you have that problem, that kind of leads you into the creative process.
Mm. I love it. Those are such great ways to think about how to spark creativity in your life, asking questions, that curiosity, don't take an answer, question everything. I love it. This has
Exactly.
been such a treat to chat with you. I have one final question for you. What does it feel like in your body to be creative?
Well, clearly, there must be a endorphin or dopamine rush going on, because we're definitely feeling good about things, like the world is right and
Yeah.
everything is good. In terms of body, if I had to sort of sum it up in one sensation or term, I would say there's warmth. There's sort of a
Mm.
feeling of literally temperature, body
Mhm.
warmth, kind of becoming conscious of it. And I think that's a positive thing, obviously, because we associate warmth with life and
Yeah.
being alive, literally.
Mhm.
And there again, there's like research where they've correlated or connected warmth through touch and other thing to positive affect, which then brings you into creative and happy and happiness and health, all those good things together. So I think, yeah, I would sort of sum it up as this kind of feeling of body warmth rising to the surface.
I love it. That I've not heard that before from someone.
Oh,
So
cool.
thanks for
Good.
sharing that with us. And
My pleasure.
it has been such a treat. And if people want to learn more about the things that you do and how to get your book, how would they go about doing that?
Sure. So the book, My Creative Space, is in all the usual outlets you would expect, obviously online, Amazon, Barnes and Noble, all sorts of sites like that. I hope it's in a local bookstore. I like to see, obviously, local bookstores flourish as well. Maybe you could get them to order it, if not. To find out more about the book as well as myself, my website's a good place to go, Donald Rattner, R-A-T-T, two T's, NER.com, has all sorts of resources besides my own book, lots of other books and videos and podcasts and good material all about creativity and its relationship to physical space. I'm also on the usual social media outlets, Instagram, Facebook, and LinkedIn.
Perfect. Well, thank you again for taking the time to chat with me. It has been such a treat. This has been amazing.
Oh, thank you. I enjoyed it.
Thanks for listening to the Sustaining Creativity Podcast. We'd love to keep in touch, so follow us on Facebook and Instagram. We are at Sustaining Creativity. Make sure to subscribe to the podcast wherever you listen to podcasts. Tag your friends and family so they can listen too. We love to hear from you, so leave your reviews, comments, and questions. Check out our website, sustainingcreativity.com, for upcoming offerings and creativity coaching. Tune in Tuesdays for our next episode. And remember, with creativity, anything's possible.